All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I'm Sasha Wolf, joined as usual by my friend and producer, the man who miraculously keeps me under 1 hour. Snip, snip, cut, cut.
An editor's life for me.
That's Michael Chauvin Dalton giggling back there, everyone. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Thank you for all your hard work on today's episode because it was a longie before you got involved.
Longie but goodie, and we'll get to that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll get right to it because we don't have a ton of time, but today's episode is a conversation I had with the great photographer Catherine Opie. And I do want to say that you managed to cut out mostly me just blabbering on. So people shouldn't be worried that you cut out anything really interesting that Cathy was saying because...
if I sacrificed anything, it was your wisdom.
Yeah. On topics far and wide. So what happened was I just felt like what I really wanted to do, like 5-10 minutes into talking to Cathy, I felt as though I wanted to crawl through the phone line and just end up wherever she was hanging out with her because she is so unbelievably warm. And I loved talking to her so much that I talked a lot. And so you cut out my ridiculous digressions, but...
They weren't ridiculous. You know, maybe someday if we ever do outtakes, we'll play some of those.
Sasha's life philosophies. That's usually what they are, right?
Yes. Where the world is heading and
exactly.
How it should change.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Oh boy. But so Cathy, who I really didn't know, turns out to just be one of the nicest, kindest, I guess nicest and kindest are sort of the same thing. Just so warm and sort
Absolutely.
of so humble and egoless. And
that comes through so clearly. I think this might be one of my favorite episodes that you've done.
Yeah, she was a joy.
Just the ability to accept, with grace what you've accomplished and move on. It's really wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I was really struck by, she's just so naturally curious about the world and interested in sort of exploring it visually without, tons of sort of preconceived notions or an agenda. She's just out there making pictures. She goes where her curiosity takes her. But yeah, her just, sort of compassion for the world as she meets it is really incredible and in the work and in her. And that's what I really realized talking to her.
Absolutely. And you have a kind of wonderful bookended conversation about the very sort of, the beginning where Catherine Opie really gets noticed in the Whitney Biennial. And then you get into where Catherine is heading in this sort of next chapter idea, which... when you think of someone who's been a force in photography and still so very active in photography, in fact, with this incredible book that's out right now, you don't think of that person as even mentioning the idea of slowing down or what they're going to do next. And of course, Catherine's idea of slowing down is, everyone else's idea of speeding up. But
yep.
But it's just a wonderful conversation.
Oh, you mentioned the book, and I want to really plug this book. So Cathy has sort of a big survey book that just came out that Phaidon published. It's just called Catherine Opie. And it is so great. I want to acknowledge that it's going to be a reach for some people. I think it's $150 on Phaidon's website. You can get it for
Find
less.
it for less.
Other places.
Shop around, yeah.
Shop around. But I think it's worth it. Again, I don't want to be in any way cavalier about the expense, but obviously I got it in sort of preparation for this talk. I would have gotten it anyway, but I really love it. I spent a lot of time with it. I'm still spending time with it. And there's over 300 pictures. Sometimes books like this I find really overwhelming. There's a lot of text in it, I think, by 4 different contributors. But it is so beautifully designed and put together. There's something about it that's just so organic that just feels really right. And I have enjoyed it so much. There's a wonderful interview in it that she does with Charlotte Cotton that I really recommend to people. And I mean, you sort of realize straight away in that interview how warm and lovely Cathy is as a person. But anyway, so if folks can manage it, I really recommend getting this book. So,
and it's the first survey of her work like this. And so, yeah, it's if you are a collector, if you're a fan, it's, if you can figure out how to do it. And I include myself in that as well. I'm waiting to, for my wife to hear she has a job, and then I will get it.
Yep. Well, all right. So because we're going to hit that hour mark, without further ado, Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure. And here is your conversation with Catherine Opie.
Catherine Opie, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. Thanks for, doing this with me.
Absolutely.
I start every episode by just asking my guests to give a rundown of their life story. So take it away, Cathy.
Okay, my life story. Well, it starts in Sandusky, Ohio, where I was born and lived until I was 13 years old. And then I moved out here to the West Coast to Poway, California. So from Sandusky, Ohio to Poway, California. And during that time, I was photographing. I picked up a camera when I was 9, and that's definitely represented in the Phaidon book, my first 9-year-old portrait. Got a camera for my birthday. And, was always like kind of interested in spaces and trying to describe spaces. And even through high school, I predominantly made friends because I carried around a camera, and I would go home and print the pictures of the high school play and go back the next day and either sell them or give them away to make friends. The camera.
I like your style.
Yeah, the camera was a way for me, I feel, to be more comfortable, not only trying to make friends, but also examine the world that we all live in.
And from Sandusky, does Sandusky have that huge amusement park?
It does. It is known for Cedar Point Amusement Park, and that's why
Okay.
people know Sandusky. Otherwise,
yeah, I was there. Yeah.
Also, the mention in Tommy Boy. I think in Tommy Boy, that film, they end up in Sandusky, Ohio. So there's always these different funny references to Sandusky. But for me, it was, the town that my dad grew up in. Same nurse who brought him into the world brought me into the world. I had the same bus driver as he had. So for me, it was like, a small, big town right on Lake Erie.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful.
Yeah, I really love the lake. I mean, that's partly why I made that big piece for the Cleveland Clinic as well. Mm-hmm. And some of those images are in the Phaidon book. And yeah, bodies of water are very special, but Lake Erie growing up was kind of crazy because I was born in 1961 and, it was when the Cayuga River was on fire, and there was just an enormous amount of concern about the pollution of the Great Lakes. And so we would have to bury our fish on a beach day. Like we'd go to the beach with a shovel and pick up all the dead fish and bury them to enjoy the lake shore. And And it was funny because I didn't really equate it to pollution at that point. I would just say, Mom, why are all the fish dead? And she's like, they die of old age. And I'm like, okay.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Mom. Good Lord. So from Sandusky, your family moved to California,
Yeah.
and then you eventually wound up at an art school, but you took a circuitous route, I think.
Yeah, I did. After graduating from high school, my brother had joined the military. He's a year older than I, and he had joined the Air Force. And I think there was a thought for a moment with me. It's like, well, should I join the military to get training to be a photographer? Because I knew that was a possibility, that I could actually get training to be a kind of commercial military photographer. And then I kind of thought about the military and said, no, I don't really think that I would do that well in the military. I wasn't out or anything at that point, but I also just had this inkling that maybe I wouldn't like the training. Maybe I wouldn't like being a soldier,
Yeah.
And
too much of a peacenik.
So I had always been a camp counselor, and I kind of remained a camp counselor after high school, and I taught 6th grade outdoor education, and I taught riparian and forestry up in the mountains in Forest Falls, California, which is above Redlands. And then then came back and worked another year at a camera store, and then realized that I needed to get it together. So the first college I went to was actually an all-girls college. Primarily, they had just opened it up to allow men to apply, and the college doesn't exist anymore. But it was in Bristol, Virginia, and the main majors were horsemanship and ballet. And I was studying. I know.
That is unbelievable.
It was like an interesting thing. And I was studying early childhood education. I was going to be a kindergarten teacher. And happy with the idea of being a kindergarten teacher because I really love kids. And my dad was dating an artist who actually was his ex-girlfriend from high school at the time. They had gotten back together after my parents divorced. And she was a painter in New York, a longtime New York painter, and Eleanor Schnur. And Eleanor, I went to visit her, and we went out, and I was photographing Wall Street and hanging out because that's how she would make her work, as she would often work off of photographs. And she just looked at me and she goes, you're not going to be a very good kindergarten teacher. You're a better artist. And I was just like, well, yeah, that isn't going to work out for me. Like being an artist. I mean, can you do that? And she's like, well, I've done it my whole life. And I'm just like, yeah, but I don't think, my parents are going to want me to do that. And she said, well, I'm just saying to you, you should leave Virginia, go to a major city, go to an art school, study art, and that's what you should be doing. And so I did that. I went and I called my mom on the payphone from my dorm room hallway in Virginia and said, Mom, Eleanor said I should go to art school. And she said, oh, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to apply to San Francisco Art Institute. And she said, well, I could pay your tuition. You're going to have to figure everything else out. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then I got in, and sure enough, I figured everything out. I worked at a residence club from 3 to 8 in the morning for my room and board, and then had a job at the YMCA afterwards because I had worked for the Y for so many years being a camp counselor. And just started making images and studying with really amazing teachers that I'm so grateful that I actually made that change in my life.
Yeah, you had pretty unbelievable group of professors through undergrad and grad school. Can you sort of rattle off some of those names?
Yeah, no, I got to study with Larry Salton and John Collier Jr. when John was wearing hearing aids and turning them down in class when people didn't want to hear it, when he didn't want to hear what people's comments were about his criticism. And but he was amazing because his dad was an anthropologist, and he was one of the early people to connote the term visual anthropology. And Perkle Jones was my large format teacher, and he was phenomenal because he used to print for Ansel Adams. So I really learned an incredible amount of darkroom technique and chemistry mixing from him that I just still value to this day, and learned large format and, pretty much switched to shooting primarily 4x5 all the way through grad school. And then I had this amazing, like, women's trot the women through kind of summer class that Connie Hatch led. And, Carrie Mae Weems came through that, and just an enormous amount of really amazing women photographers that I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is a possibility. And then I waited a year, and I worked at Rainbow Grocery, a collective with all these amazing lesbians doing produce display and stocking the produce. And that was a pretty great job, actually. I got to be really good at a 400-pound symmetrical carrot wheel that I was always very proud of. And so I had one more year in San Francisco before going off to CalArts for grad school, where I studied with Millie Wilson and Connie Hatch again, and Catherine Lord, and Krzysztof Wodishko and Alan Sekula, Joanne Callis, Judy Fiskin, Gay Block. They were all really phenomenal teachers as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. That's really an incredible
lineup. No, and I think that kind of is the inspiration to teach. I've taught now for 30 years. And part of it is that I had amazing teachers who invested a lot of hope and energy and, time with me. And I kind of believe in that community building that, you give back. And part of teaching is that. And happy to have been doing that service for as long as I have.
And you had Eleanor. It's really interesting because, it sounds like she played a sort of fast and quick but incredibly pivotal role. And, I read about Eleanor when I was, reading up on you and reading through your new amazing Phaidon book. And I thought, God, it's just so crazy how one person can just change the trajectory of our lives so dramatically.
Yeah, and it was one person, Eleanor.
And I would think that would stay with you also, knowing that you can, if you have a student who maybe, lack confidence or be on the edge, that from your own experience that just relating to that person in the right way, even briefly, that sort of encouragement can just be so powerful.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't have to be like teachers who are there for you for a long time, but even just someone like your dad's girlfriend who sort of made you see things differently and provided you with a sort of different outlook. It's just really amazing.
Yeah, and actually if you go to in the Phaidon book, one of the first photographs you come on is Last Day in New York in 1985. And that was also a trip where I was visiting Eleanor. And we would go out and we would photograph together. So I had been just wandering around on a cold winter day in New York with my overcoat and my fedora. And that was always kind of my favorite outfit. Because I don't know, being a street photographer, for some reason, I thought if I wore that, I was invisible. Don't ask me why I thought I was invisible. But for some reason, I thought it had magical powers of invisibility, and I could get amazing street photographs just by wearing this one outfit, But yeah, no, it is.
Like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak.
Exactly. Before Harry Potter. BHP.
That's awesome. That's great.
But no, I'm still in touch with Eleanor. She's still living and still painting in New York. And she's always been this constant person in my life, which is lovely.
Yeah, I was also sort of made a note to ask you about something else that just tends to preoccupy me. So I'm going to drag you into this.
Okay.
But
drag me in.
Your mom took a lot of home movies and family photos.
Yes, a lot. She was really the documentarian of the family. And so yeah, they're beautiful.
I wonder, do you think that being a photographer, I just wonder how much you think being a photographer comes from just that. And whether you think of it in terms of sort of nature or nurture, because I know, my biological father made television commercials, and I studied filmmaking and, and photography, and I don't know that. I mean, I think there's a good chance I would not have gone down this path if my father hadn't done what he did and given me a camera and been around. I just sort of fascinated by this sort of way in which, when we're very little, these things that our parents are doing around us just imprints on us so intensely.
Yeah, I think there was a number of things around me. There was a kind of a guy in Sandusky, Ohio by the name of Tom Capri, and he was like always had his camera, and I had been in his dark room when I was a kid, and my grandfather had a dark room, and he had cameras, and my Uncle John is a really amazing painter as well, and his wife, my Aunt Sue, is an incredible sculptor.
Oh, you're surrounded.
John
by
and
artists.
Susan Opie,
Yeah.
and my parents owned a craft company. We owned Opie Craft.
Right.
So I'm around original art. I'm around, knowing family artists, and I'm around people who are using cameras in a more sophisticated and interesting way. And my grandfather would take these amazing trips. In the 60s, he would go to Africa and take these like very specific trips of visiting. It could be thought of as National Geographic now, but he would go and visit tribes and make images. And he came home with a lot of mass and ivory and that kind of thing. And but he'd set up the slide projector, and we would have Sunday family dinner, and then we would watch the slideshows of his recent travels. And so there was this photography going on around me that I appreciated, and I think I was watching it. And then I wanted to have a camera and take my own pictures.
Yep. So when you get out of, or when you're sort of finishing up graduate school, are you feeling confident at this point in your abilities and feeling like you know which direction you're pointing in, or what's your state of mind? Because I know it can be very
not really. I mean, it's 1988, so the big thing that was happening in photography wasn't what I was doing. I mean, it was the picture generation.
Right.
I'm not out of the picture generation. I'm more traditional, kind of coming out of the modernist sensibility of the medium. And, definitely trained out of the Zarkowski school, so to speak. And so I didn't think about how I was going to do this. I know that it's what I did, but I didn't have a plan beyond, let's go ahead and try to figure out how to get a teaching job. And that was the predominant reason why I got my master's degree. And so I continue, I've always made work, and I just continued to make work. And I think that after CalArts in 1990, 89, 90, I buy all my friends' mustaches and have them come to my living room in Silver Lake, and where I put up the same colored yellow seamless, and I make Being and Having with a 4x5 camera. And the response to that body of work, including it being included in Artforum in an article that Judith Butler wrote, was all of a sudden a different kind of entry. And then I started making the more formal portraits. But before that, I was still doing work on cities. Because before that body of work of Being and Having, I had graduated from CalArts. And after doing the master plan, I was working on the subway being built through MacArthur Park in Los Angeles and its relationship to gentrification. And so when I went all of a sudden for the first time into the studio to do Being and Having in the early portraits, and then people were looking at that work, then I was like, oh, well, how do I negotiate this? Because I'm just trying to get a teaching job, and it took a while for me to figure out that I was making a career for myself, actually.
Right.
And I would say that it was after the 95 Whitney Biennial that I realized that, oh, I'm being kind of looked at now. Like people are knowing who I am, and I'm becoming an international artist. And maybe I should, and at this point in time, I was the lab tech down at UC Irvine, and I had designed and built all their dark rooms and was managing the facility, and realized that different students were coming there to potentially study with me, but I wasn't teaching. I was in charge of the entire facility, and realizing that I needed to just go and start teaching adjunct and leave a full-time job so that I could get into that portion of my plans in life, so to speak.
Do you want to just tell people who are listening who may not have this at their fingertips what happened at the Whitney Biennial, why that launched your career?
Well, in 1995, Biennial was the first major museum exhibition I was ever put in. And I had just finished the body of work of portraits on the bright colored seamless of my friends. But I also had made, in 1994, a pretty daring self-portrait called Pervert. Mm-hmm. And so that was actually the first time that Pervert had ever been exhibited. It had never even been in a gallery before that. And so the Whitney wanted new work. And so it was all new work of 16 by 20s, the 30 by 60 more performative portraits of my friends, and then Pervert. And I was right across from Nicole Eisenman. And, and then right down from me was Matthew Barney. Then right down over on the same floor was Nan Golden. And it was pretty surreal. My dad came. I had to go home and show them Pervert. My parents were divorced, so I showed my dad first and said, I just need to let you know that this is going to show in the Whitney Museum of American Art. And I know that you know that I'm a lesbian, but there's some other parts of my life that you don't really know much about. So I had to have a second coming out.
Yep.
And that was, my dad was fine with it. My mom was like, oh, wow. My stepmother was horrified and wanted to basically make sure that I never saw my niece again because she thought I was disturbed. And my brother, fortunately, didn't allow that. And to this day, she's also in the book. Kayla has Owen on her lap looking up at the light, and she's pregnant. And she's like my daughter, Kayla. So, I had all this all of a sudden, I had homophobia enter my life in relationship to my own family again. But then I had this public immediate opinion that was casted around me in which people would be intimidated by me because
I saw that show. I was there. It scared the shit out of me.
So I have to ask you, why did it scare the shit out of you?
I think it still scares me, by the way, because there's a part of me, and this is not going to become about me, but there's definitely, I think I probably speak for, I'm not unique. I think there's a part of me that is sort of associates that look, that sort of quintessential S&M look with something dark.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people do. Yeah.
And it scared me. And Matthew Barney scared me, by the way. And and I think, so obviously I needed to grow up a bit. Yeah, I mean, look, that show had just a huge effect on me, and not the least of which is to really make you think about, why am I reacting this way? Why do I feel this way? And that's so important. I mean, all of a sudden you're having some sort of self-therapy session with yourself, and these things are important. But
internal homophobia is like a really difficult thing, and I don't think definitely. It's articulated very much, and that was kind of my articulation of it in relationship to how I viewed my own community. kind of cast away the leather community again in relationship to the March on Washington. And so it was really surprising that in my own community that I would be called a pervert, more so than, I knew that already existed in terms of dyke and pervert and those kinds of that language being cast upon me outside of my own community. But when all of a sudden that came up as this kind of binary of normal or abnormal from my own queer community, I was like, wait a second here. And so just decided to be fairly bold in making that portrait.
Were you terrified or?
No, I was
I would be so scared.
I was more terrified of what people thought of me afterwards than I was in making it. Like I made it in San Francisco in a studio. I was surrounded by friends.
Right, of course.
I had my best friend Idexa holding my hand the whole time, who had just become my best friend the year before. I had Raylan Galena, who was an amazing, amazing body. Did a lot of stuff with Fakir Musafar. Part of that whole community did the cutting because I wanted the cutting to be really, really perfect. And then I had my two friends, Melissa, do the needlework. So Joey and Melissa did the needlework, and they were both professional piercers at Body M. So I wasn't terrified in doing that, and I did it in this way that it was what a beautiful day in the studio or evening in the studio of people gathering. But what happened when it went out into the world and people kind of placing a different identity on me was what was surprising, that people would automatically say, wow, I was so scared to talk to you, but you're so nice. And those ideas around how personality is formed in relationship to one's art practice, I didn't have any expectation of, nor did I think of it. And I think that's why I switched right away to the freeways, to be honest.
Just to take yourself out of that space for a while.
Yeah, it was intense. It was all, I didn't want to be the poster child of the SM leather community from a leather dyke perspective. I was just making work that was really important and crucial to me and very political in terms of losing friends from AIDS. I mean, my community was decimated and blood was part of the substance of fear. And so I wanted to just really use blood as a substance, but it wasn't supposed to be fearful. But I think that when you make work within a community that is so used to that expressing the body in that way, that you in a weird way forget how it would be it's responded on a public level.
Well, also your work, being and having, and work you'd made before that, there was a certain amount of humor and
tenderness,
real warmth and playfulness. Exactly.
Yeah, it was tender.
So I do think that. But it's really interesting because I think in a way it's like, so that was startling. But then, now we have all this other work from you since Pervert. And it's sort of like, oh, yeah, right. That Cathy's really yummy and sweet and mushy.
Right.
Full of soul and love. And so, now now you've sort of bracketed Pervert with, that mushier side of you. But I think, it was sort of startling going from that very playful, tender, as you say, work to like this defiant.
Angry. You could say it. It was an angry piece.
Yeah.
It's an angry piece. It really is. I mean, it's formally really complicated, but the making of it came out of a place of anger. That's for sure.
I will say that when I look at it, over the years, as I've become more comfortable with it, one of the things that has made me more comfortable is actually knowing that, of course, you're surrounded by people, because it could not have, you couldn't have done all the needlework by yourself.
Right.
I mean, there's and it's so funny just knowing that, for me, for whatever reason, just really softens everything. I don't know. It's really, I start filling in what's going on around you in my head.
Well, I have it on film if you ever want to see it.
Oh, I would. Are you kidding?
Yeah, no,
Absolutely. I would love to
it's
see
documented. It's really beautiful, actually.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's this one moment that Raylan starts, she's already started the cutting on me. And then she sees a pimple on my, like above my boob, and she starts fussing with it and saying, like, I'm going to get this, because I'm like, it's been there forever. It won't pop. And she's like, I'm going to get it. And we're laughing and stuff. And it's just like this really tender moment. But then after that, when she goes back into the cutting, I've lost my sense of concentration. And so the dealing with the pain at that moment is a little bit different until I get back into my head. Mm-hmm. But it's just, it's funny to have this all of a sudden, this pimple popping moment,
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure someone's written some sort of thesis on why human beings love to pop one another's pimples, but it's...
I know, right? It's the thing.
It is very strange. I'd like to know how it relates to like hundreds of thousands of years ago. But
I'm sorry, that pimple popper thing on YouTube is much worse than Pervert could ever be.
Wait, what pimple popper thing on YouTube?
There's like Dr. Pimple Popper or whatever YouTube.
I don't even know about this. Don't, come
bad.
on. I have a certain amount of innocence.
It's bad. It's bad.
Don't mess with my innocence.
It's not enjoyable television, let me tell you.
God, kids today. So, I want to ask you a big overview question.
Okay.
Has this life been satisfying for you? I mean, do you ever, I sometimes ask people this because it's something that I go through a lot, trying to figure out, have I been the person I hope to be? Have I contributed in a way that I'd hoped to? And I'm always interested in hearing what people who I think are particularly soulful people, decent people, menschy people, as my people would say, how they feel about the life that they've lived thus far.
I'm surprised by it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm surprised that I've actually built and have such a beautiful and full life. I think I was... I think that I didn't have any expectations of being able to also financially support myself because I worked so hard through both my undergrad and my grad and even afterwards, and just, putting it all together. Like being a butch dyke doesn't really afford the kind of flirtatious ability to maneuver through life, And so to get like the things that I really desired, which was having my own family, and being able to buy a house and being able to like sustain a studio practice as well as a teaching practice, I would say that it's surprisingly much more charmed than I had anticipated my life to be.
That's wonderful. What a fantastic place to find yourself. So you feel settled and at peace to a certain extent.
Yeah, I feel settled and at peace. And I would say that the biggest barrier in my life now is how do I actually slow my life down? Mm-hmm. Turning 60, I know that I have 2 to 3 more years at UCLA, and then I want to retire. After that point, it'll be about 35 years of teaching.
Wow.
I know that I want to just explore what I want to make as an artist. Mm-hmm. I want to, in a weird way, be a little less giving, which is an odd thing to say because I really enjoy that side of me. But, being on 3 boards as a trustee, as well as being a full-time professor, as well as being a full-time exhibiting artist, I'm really looking forward to seeing what it'll be like not to have as many hats on my head, so to speak.
More time to go fishing?
Yeah, exactly. I still haven't caught that goddamn fish up in 3 Rivers yet. I'm trying. But more time to do things like I have this real big desire to, you talked about cold. I like cold too. Mm-hmm. Like I'm super into dead of winter kind of thing. And I'm obsessed with Norway's light in the winter. Mm-hmm. That blue light. It's almost as if you're holding a blue filter over a lens. And I want to make blue portraits in a small town in Norway up in the most northern area. And I want to make blue landscapes. And I want to have that month in that kind of coldness just to, like, again, be with the elements and see what I can get with my cameras. And I also want to do like really hokey full moon photographs in our house in Three Rivers, where I'm shooting with an 810 camera again, which I haven't allowed myself to do in years, and just do black and white long exposures of this landscape that I've totally grown to love after having the house there for 16 years now. And just imagine just that kind of giving myself time. I don't give myself enough time in my mind right now. You know, it always feels like it's, okay, I get to do this between this time and this time, then I have to move on to this.
Yeah, things get cut short, yeah.
Yeah, I want a different kind of slowness in my life that I hope that I can obtain, but also be okay with the slowness. I don't know if I'm going to be okay slowing down, to tell you the truth.
By the way, that didn't sound like too much slowing down, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's not like I'm going to go sit on my rocking chair on the front porch. So when you think about like that picture you just painted for me, do you think about those different photographs that you imagine making? Do you think about how they'll fit in with the work that's come before? Or do you not care? It doesn't matter. You're not preoccupied with that nonsense.
I think you can answer that by going through the Phaidon book.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm preoccupied with being a singular identity as an artist, which I've said so many times before. I'm not. I mean, I hope that I can constantly question and stretch my ability with the medium of photography. Like making The Modernist was a huge break for me, and then going from The Modernist to making rhetorical landscapes to even making 2020 this body of work this year, and then what I just did in Rome like really surprised me. I feel like I've never had a successful experience photographing in a different country. I really feel like that American photographer title is a real kind of, stamp on me, so to speak. And it is what I'm most comfortable with. I feel like I can talk about American identity in a really complicated, and hopefully interesting way. But I did just go to Rome for 6 weeks at the American Academy and really feel like I left with something that I think will be a good body of work.
Wow, exciting.
Yeah, and I haven't started editing it yet because I need time after a big trip to just let it kind of wash over me before I go into editing mode.
How long do you usually wait about?
About 3 or 4 months, usually.
Good, that's great. But yeah, I think that's the way to go. But obviously everyone's different, but I do think that that's really helpful.
Yeah, before I even look at the contact sheets or anything, it's like I get them done and the folders are there, and I might go and I might peek, but I don't start editing. Like I'll peek at my experience and then I'll be like, nope, not yet. It's just got to sit there and brew. And you kind of have to get your head in a different position, I feel, from a experiencing and making position to then the editing position.
Yes.
And it takes time, I believe.
I always joke around about artists who say, oh, Sasha, I'll be looking at work and we'll get to a particular image. And oh, Sasha, I love this image. I hope you love it too. It's yada, yada, yada. And when I made it, this and that, and this is how I felt, and blah, blah, blah. And I just look at them and I'm like, well, none of that's actually in the picture.
Well, that's the problem.
Right, exactly. So it's like you have to look again. People work differently, but for a lot of people, it's very helpful to get away from, put a little time in so that you can separate how you feel when you made the picture from the picture, because otherwise it's really difficult to have any sense of how it's going to be in the world separate from you.
Yeah, and hopefully the photograph works outside of you.
Right,
always.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, that's the thing, is I can have all of these different experiences and know what I'm experiencing. But if I can't structurally do it within the body of work to connote that, then I'm not hitting the mark. You know, I have to, the work has to not have an overall universality to it, but it certainly has to be positioned in my mind. And I do try to do that all the way through all the various bodies of work, is this kind of repositioning to get at other aspects of also just not the aspect of what I'm making images of, but how it relates to the history of representation in photography.
So I was trying to trap you earlier. I'm going to go back to this because, you know, you were one of the contributors in my book and in PhotoWork. And so for the question, do you associate your work with a particular genre of photography? You wrote, in the beginning of making photographs, I decided that I needed to define myself within a genre. I would often call myself a social documentary photographer. Ultimately, I realized that I'm interested in ideas around democracy and humanity and the ability for the camera to record these ideas in relation to history. And I just want to say that I really love that answer, and I love the way you've decided that your genre is humanity.
Yeah,
and not,
I have.
But that's so great. And I think that's the answer when people think, well, what's Cathy doing? You know, these soft focus landscapes, or how does this, you know, whatever. It's like, well, you're just, you know, as I've said this a number of times now already today as we've been talking, clearly and extremely a person who feels things deeply and is really interested in being a caring person on the planet and adding goodness. And you know, that's the genre that you work within, right? I mean, it's sort of amazing. And I think that if it was at all unclear to me before the Phaidon book, it's not unclear at all anymore. Because
that's nice.
That sense of you is there. And it's, I'm going to choke up because this is the kind of person I am. I've found the experience of spending time with the book extremely moving.
Thank you.
So the kindness in it and the caring for other people was really good to take in. And of course, your pictures are just so beautiful. And so that incredible formal beauty and the attention to color palette, which I think is extremely important when working in color, and the beautiful rich tones and the blacks in a lot of the work, and which really moved me and sucked me in personally. And then the just formal lines in the black and white work. I mean, I don't want to in any way, you know, not talk up the incredible aesthetics of your work, but there is so much caring in the work, and it's really moving. So, sorry, I probably embarrassed you.
No, you didn't embarrass me at all. I'm really glad that you get that from the work. I do think that this book does allow people to enter my practice in a different way. I like that it's not chronological. It's kind of a relief from my own rigidity, because I am rigid as an artist. I think you can see that as I'm building bodies of work, there's a certain rigidity to ideas of structure for me that I can't really seem to escape. But I like that you see the care, because I am overly concerned with the state of the world. And that is the last 4 years under the Trump administration, why I kind of stretched myself and made the modernist and rhetorical landscapes in 2020 is just needing to go back and think about the structure of bearing witness, but also the invented structure of our relationship to being a hungry artist who's living in their studio and their work becomes burning down modernist houses in LA. Like that narrative in its own way really reflects just how worried I am about people being able to even live a sustainable life. And if this planet is going to be sustainable for us. And I feel a big need to talk about those things right now, because I've just seen more hate than I could have imagined coming
brutal.
off the Obama administration, that I didn't think that was actually, like, I was in a little bit of a drink the Kool-Aid land, and I was just like, whoa, America.
No, you're not alone. I mean, I have really been, profoundly down for stretches of time with the sort of realization of, I don't want to just sort of say how awful human beings are, but can be. But I definitely got the ratio wrong of good to bad. I mean, that's sort of the simplest way I could say it. And I'm sort of doubling back now and really trying, because I feel like the only way out for me to get out of this mindset is to really, really try and understand the evolutionary psychology of it and how we were created, the way in which a lot of the worst behavior that we've seen is something that we are hardwired for, and that it's only through a certain
we
are. No, we are.
I know.
I mean, and that's the thing. And it's, I think it takes a lot of reflection, and not everyone comes from a place where they know how to be really introspective and reflective. I've been given those tools to be able to sort of deconstruct my own behavior and reactions to things.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't have that, right?
No, they don't. And also reality television hasn't helped. And the modeling
all that stuff
is
disgusting.
The snarkiness is just, it hasn't helped. And I think that, I remember when I was watching my son one day watching the Kardashians.
I don't.
And he's also really into RuPaul's show, which I actually, him and my wife, Julie, watch RuPaul all the time, Drag Race. And I love that they're into it. But they're like, Mama Cathy, I don't understand. Why aren't you watching Drag Race with us? And I said, listen, I grew up in the most beautiful drag community that you could imagine in San Francisco with the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And for me, this isn't what's being represented. I said they're a little bit too mean to each other. And it's a little too hard for me.
Yeah.
I don't do meanness.
Yeah.
I just don't do mean.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I watched one season of Survivor and I was like, that was too much for me. And I don't watch any of those things. The only thing I watch is Top Chef or some Great British Baking Show. I mean,
right.
I want it to be like some sort of like, I call it frontal lobotomy television, but it's just easy and nice. And I'm with you. But I don't think, it's like Trump. It's just a symptom of who we are. And, I always say to people that, I don't know why we don't teach basic human psychology to children. Like that should be right there with math and science.
Well, we did with our son. We sent him to this hippie preschool called Play Mountain Place, which is all based on conflict resolution. So, but that's the way we wanted to roll. But everybody should be learning conflict resolution.
Everyone should understand their own psyche. Just start with that. Just understand your own psyche. And even everyone throwing like accusing each other of being this person or that person. It's like if you understand your own psyche, you understand the most basic thing. We're all biased. We all have biases. It's what being a human being is about. Oh, man. Okay. I'm like the queen of digression.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It is, it is like something, it's going back to kindness, is that I have a really hard time even thinking about making a snarky portrait. I mean, there's a lot of photographers out there who want this idea of an edge in their portrait, but an edge in their portrait is also depicting people in kind of sometimes their worst situations.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in that edge and what that does in terms of depicting it. So it's something that I'm really aware of in terms of trying to create a better sense of humanity somehow. And I guess that's just my way of trying to approach portraiture, so to speak.
Will you make more films, do you think? I mean, how was the experience of making The Modernist? I mean, it's not really a traditional film, but it's...
No, I mean, I made a traditional film with Lisa Udelson called Same Difference, which I really enjoyed, framing the headshots of the kids talking about how gay marriage was taken away from their family with Prop 8.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a talking portrait. And I liked that aspect of it a lot. I didn't like the editing aspect. And collaboration is good, but it's also a little difficult, especially when you're just used to making your own work all these years.
Yep.
So film to me is a really, I mean, I have such respect for film, and I really look at film a lot. Definitely a movie buff, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I just saw the most beautiful film the other day. It's such a rare film that I had forgotten about it. It was a 1972 David Hockney film, The Big Splash. And it was so homoerotic, so beautiful to look at. And it was young David Hockney. And it just kind of blew my mind because it was based on him, but also there was a fictional component to it. So it was really odd. But it was on Criterion, and I love Criterion.
Criterion's amazing. I know. Criterion is like a national treasure. It's incredible.
I'm like, thank God for Criterion.
I know.
You know. And Julie's like, well, you don't watch Criterion very much. Why do we pay for that? I'm like, because we have to.
Yeah, no, you have to. It's you have to have it. Jason Fulford, I think it was Jason who mentioned Criterion, but it comes up so often in conversations I have with friends. And, you know, I think it was on Criterion. I was just rewatching some John Cassavetes. When was the last time you saw Faces?
Oh, gosh, I don't even remember. Probably the 80s.
Promise
like
me, will you go watch Faces? Watch Faces. I'm going to check up on you. Even if you don't, you know, just hang in long enough to see some framing of Jenna Rollins' face. It's incredible. I think you'll find it really inspiring. The photography is amazing. But yeah, no, I love finding those nuggets. Especially.
I mean, if I was a filmmaker, I would want to be a filmmaker like Chloe Zhao.
Oh God, yeah,
like
she's
that's
great. Yeah.
That's who I would want to be as a filmmaker, you know, or even a little bit of a flavor of Gus Van Sant. Mm-hmm. I would want really quiet films that did a lot with landscape, but also really showed, you know, just the human condition, so to speak.
Kelly Reichardt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. First Cow was one of my favorite films of 2020. Just want to shout out for First Cow.
Yeah.
Didn't get as much love as it should have. God damn it. Such a great movie. Well, anyway, listen, I could talk to you forever, but we'll wrap up and maybe you'll come on again and we'll do a part 2. And I'm sort of already thinking, how can I finagle my way to be on that Norway trip with you? But anyway.
Oh, right. Exactly. For the cold blueness of it all.
Oh, my God. It's going to be amazing. Well, listen, just huge congratulations on the Phaidon book. Everyone go out and get it. It's just such a beautiful object. And the printing is fantastic. Guys did a great job.
They did everything just perfectly. Like, I couldn't ask for a better handling of the work on Phaidon's behalf.
God, what a blessing.
Really amazing. Yeah.
Well, big congratulations.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. And of course I'll come back. We'll just like dig deep in another time about other people and photographs that we like.
I mean, you've made so much amazing work. Of course, we could do an episode just per body of work easily. But with the podcast, I try not to get too into specific images because a podcast is audio.
It's a podcast.
Try and keep it a bit more general. But anyway, okay, Cathy, until next time, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Okay, bye.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear PhotoWork on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.